Let's get to Tim Walz, who, just when you think no one's sitting at this table, neither she nor the big white blanket, can embarrass themselves any further, he does. She asks him, to her credit, about the carrying the weapons in war, which we know is a lie. He never served in war. He's been stealing valor for quite some time. And take a listen to this answer.
Say, hey, when there's a problem, you call a man. The Democrats can't even tell you what a man is.
So when you hear Walz brag about how much of a man he is, what does that tell you?
I think there might be a little bit of a cope there, you could say. There's a little bit, he has to remind us how masculine he is, trying to not even be able to load a shotgun or fix a truck.
Tim Walz thought he could coast on soft speeches and photo ops, but Megyn Kelly and Kirk brought the political sledgehammers in a brutal takedown. They exposed every crack in his leadership, from broken schools to rising crime to failed policies dressed as progress. It was not just criticism, it was demolition. They peeled back the curtain and revealed a governor more concerned with headlines than results. The show is over, and the truth just stole the spotlight.
Said that you carried weapons in war, but you have never deployed actually in a war zone. A campaign official said that you misspoke. Did you?
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly proud. I've done 24 years of wearing uniform. About our children being shot in schools.
I'll tell you one thing. The most masculine thing that someone can do in America today is stand up for women that are not able to stand up for themselves.
Right.
So while Tim Walz is going on Gavin Newsom's podcast, attacking me, by the way, saying that I'm a bad guy, well, I'm sorry, Governor Walz. One thing that we don't have in common is, unlike you in Minnesota, I, every single day, am actually fighting for female privacy in locker rooms, and that women's sports will not have men in them. Real men stand up for women when they're not able to stand up for them.
Megyn Kelly and Kirk do not wait for permission. They do not ask if the stage is clear when they see nonsense parading itself as leadership. They do not whisper about it behind closed doors. They light it up with cameras rolling and facts flying. And when it came to Governor Tim Walz, they both showed up with enough fuel to turn his entire narrative into a bonfire, not because they had a grudge, but because incompetence that loud practically begs for a microphone.
The idea that you said that you were in war. Did you misspeak, as the campaign has said?
Yeah, I said we were talking about, in this case, this was after a school shooting, the ideas of carrying these weapons of war. And my wife, the English teacher, told me my grammar's not always correct. But again, if it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack on my dog.
This is a sacred trust. In the spring of 2005, Walz walked away from that sacred trust, abandoning his post when he learned of an upcoming Iraq deployment. This is Senecal Pubula saying this. He is a coward. According to this Twitter feed, he is a quitter. And every veteran I've talked to thinks that Walz is close to betraying the country by doing it.
Megyn Kelly took one glance at the political packaging around Walz and knew something was off. He wore the everyman label like a costume parading as a folksy governor who understood the plight of the average Minnesotan. But Megyn has spent years shredding pretenders and plastic narratives, and she knew what she was looking at. Walz's act did not scream authenticity, it screamed consultant-approved nonsense wrapped in second-hand sincerity.
What Walz did is the moral equivalent of a mother dropping off her 5 preteen children at an orphanage in the dead of night so that she could run for Congress. Yes, it is that bad. This was more than just abandoning troops. It also reflects a major personal deficit in his character and makeup. By the way, this is written by a veteran.
She began peeling back the glossy exterior by exposing the contradiction between his image and his execution. Here was a man who campaigned on unity and transparency, but governed with confusion and cowardice. Megyn zeroed in on the way Walz constantly shifted blame like a kid who spills milk and insists the cup committed treason. His entire approach to leadership could be summed up in 3 steps: announce a vague plan, dodge accountability, and hold a press conference that answers none of the Questions asked Charlie Kirk, on the other hand, went straight for the economic jugular. He lit up Walz's fiscal policies like they were written on flash paper. Charlie mocked the governor's ability to drive businesses out of Minnesota faster than a winter snowstorm clears the streets. Taxes were up, regulations were wild, and economic growth was as stagnant as a swamp. In July, Charlie pointed out that Walz seemed to think prosperity meant creating more government jobs while punishing the private sector for daring to succeed. Then the two of them started weaving the bigger picture. Megyn dissected the pandemic mismanagement. She broke down how Walz acted like a part-time epidemiologist with a full-time fear machine. Lockdowns came down hard, selectively applied depending on political convenience. Small businesses were crushed while massive corporations skated through untouched. Schools shut down while bars got capacity waivers. It was not science, she argued. It was politics dressed up in a lab coat.
The idea that you said that you were in war. Did you misspeak, as the campaign has said?
Yeah, I said we were talking about, in this case, this was after a school shooting, the ideas of carrying these weapons of war. And my wife, the English teacher, told me my grammar is not always correct. But again, if it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack on...
Charlie added to the fire with receipts. He highlighted how Walz paraded data one week and buried it the next, depending on which way the public wind was blowing. Hospital capacities were overblown, projections missed the mark, and policies were designed more to soothe headlines than to protect citizens. Charlie called it panic management, pretending to be governance instead of preparing people. Walz terrified them, and instead of leading, he froze like a deer in the political headlights. But it was not just the policies, it was the theatre. Megyn pointed out how Walz always managed to insert himself into photo ops at just the right moment. Floods, protests, vaccinations. He was their sleeve rolled up, face grim, always looking like a character in a documentary titled The Burden of Leadership. And yet she noted when the consequences hit, when cities burned, kids fell behind, and small businesses vanished, Walz was nowhere to be found. He disappeared like a ghost. With a campaign team, Charlie did not let the riot slide either. He pulled out the receipts on how the governor handled the George Floyd protests turned riot. Cities fell into chaos, police were overwhelmed, and Walz waited until the damage was irreversible before calling in the National Guard.
Tim Walz then lied about it to run for Congress and acted as if he was on the front lines. And people in Walz's battalion died. People under his supervision died. If Master Sergeant retired Walz could not be trusted to fulfill his duties he had to his soldiers, his unit, and his nation in 2005, how can he be trusted to be vice president in 2025?
Charlie mocked the idea that Walz was waiting for more information. He said it looked more like Walz was waiting for someone else to fix the mess so he could take credit afterward. The hesitation, the stalling, the let it burn approach, it all painted the picture of a man more afraid of political fallout than actual flames. Then came education. Megyn launched into Walz's record on schools with the precision of someone who knows exactly how badly children have been failed under weak leadership. She pointed out how Walz, a former teacher, oversaw one of the most dramatic drops in educational performance Minnesota had seen in years. Reading scores fell, math scores tanked, and instead of a course correction, Walz offered more virtual learning and fewer actual solutions. Then both of them hit the culture issues. Megyn dissected how Walz has tried to play both sides of every social issue, ending up as the political equivalent of lukewarm soup. He never leads with conviction, just calculation, and in trying to offend no one, he ended up pleasing even fewer. She called him out for enabling radical agendas while pretending to be the adult in the room. His version of moderation, she argued, was just hiding the extremism behind a Minnesota accent.
What kind of bullshit is that? No, you don't, sir. We don't lie about military service we didn't actually perform, like going to war. We don't steal valor by saying that we had a higher rank in the National Guard than we did. We don't run around saying we served in operating Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan when we didn't. We don't stand and watch somebody say that we were in combat in Iraq when we weren't.
Charlie added his jabs by focusing on Walz's loyalty to the political machine. He said Walz did not lead Minnesota. He answered to his donors, his party's talking points, and whatever the latest progressive fad demanded. When the party told him to mask kids, he did it. When they told him to close churches but leave open liquor stores, he complied. When they told him to pretend crime was a myth, he nodded like a bobblehead in a windstorm. Charlie's point was simple. Walz was not a governor, he was a manager. For the Democratic brand in snow boots and they were not done, Megyn pivoted to public safety. She highlighted how under Walz's leadership law enforcement had been demoralized, defunded and demonized. Morale was in the basement, crime was on the rise, and residents were left wondering why leadership was acting like public safety was a controversial concept. With stats, officer resignation rates and neighborhood testimony, she connected the dots between rhetoric and results, showing how soft on crime policies have created hard consequences for the people living in the cities Walz pretends to care about. She said Walz did not just fail to stop the chaos, he participated in the charade that created it together. Their takedown was not just one-sided, it was comprehensive. They hit leadership, economy, education, safety and culture, and they did it without ever needing to scream. That is what made it sting even more. It was not emotional, it was surgical, it was not loud, it was lethal.
Podcast attacking me, by the way, saying that I'm a bad guy. Well, I'm sorry, Governor Walz. One thing that we don't have in common is, unlike you in Minnesota, I every single day am actually fighting for female privacy in locker rooms and that women's sports will not have men in them. Real men.
They stripped away the talking points, they dismantled the excuses, they mocked the half-baked narratives, and what was left standing was a portrait of a man who talked big, acted small, and governed like he was always waiting for someone else to make the first move. And it was not over. Megyn left the door wide open, promising to keep the spotlight aimed at leadership that fails the people it pretends to serve. Charlie vowed to keep exposing the numbers, the contradictions, and the political gymnastics that try to pass for governance, because the truth is Tim Walz might keep smiling through press conferences, but the curtain has been pulled. Megyn and Charlie kept pressing. They dug into Walz's climate agenda next, a perfectly polished piece of political theater that sounded good on paper but collapsed under its own contradictions. Megyn pointed out how Walz loved to talk about green energy like he was auditioning for a solar panel commercial, but back in Minnesota the roads were still crumbling and people were freezing during the winter because of failing energy grids and poor planning. It was all optics with no substance, shiny headlines with no follow-through.
Disaster unfolded when hundreds of people were killed. You know whether you were in a place where hundreds of people are being massacred by their government.
Charlie zoomed in on the budget. He broke it down like a math teacher tired of watching students fail the basics. The numbers did not lie. Minnesota was raking in taxpayer money, but somehow always broke when it came time to fix real problems. Charlie called it reverse alchemy. They turned gold into potholes. He mocked the state's obsession with raising taxes in the name of progress, while progress itself could not be found anywhere outside of staged photo ops and campaign flyers. Megyn turned the focus to healthcare, another banner issue for Walz, who promised reforms but delivered nothing more than bureaucratic sludge. Wait times increased, rural hospitals suffered, and the only thing that grew was the size of the committees trying to solve.
If it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack on my dog.
This took chutzpah. Let's go through it. You said you carried weapons in war, but you've never deployed in a war zone. A campaign official of yours said you misspoke. Did you? Well, I'm proud, incredibly proud of my record. He keeps doing this. Equally proud of my service in the classroom. Did I mention I was a teacher and a coach, an assistant coach? Okay, whatever. But he's more stolen valor. In the classroom, I'm in the classroom. My record speaks for itself. It doesn't, actually. You've put a lot of lies into that record that you've been called out on by service personnel.
Megyn said it was the only healthcare strategy in America that somehow made people sicker just by watching it unfold. Doctors were frustrated, patients were left waiting, and the system looked more like a hamster wheel than a functioning network. Charlie tackled immigration. He highlighted Walz's vague stance, always wrapped in soft words, and never in clear policy. Sanctuary city gestures, symbolic declarations, and an open-door approach that ignored the logistical strain on communities already dealing with stretched resources. Charlie pointed out the growing disconnect between what politicians in St. Paul wanted and what everyday Minnesotans were actually experiencing. The gap was wide and growing wider, and Walz was building a bridge of promises that led absolutely nowhere.
Disgusting, repulsive, and reprehensible examples of abandoning one's unit, of turning back on country and instead for own personal comfort and safety that we have ever seen in politics. And it's far worse than I even think people are describing. It is worse than stolen valor. It is abandoning your fellow soldier.
Then they revisited Walz's media strategy. Megyn tore it apart: the carefully curated interviews, the puff pieces, the refusal to face tough questions unless the cameras were friendly, and the script was approved. Megyn had seen plenty of polished politicians hide behind press agents, but Walz turned it into an art form. She joked that his idea of transparency was letting reporters watch him read a statement written by 6 people he never met. Charlie nodded and added that Walz treated media appearances like college group projects. He showed up at the end, read the final paragraph, and expected to get the credit. Meanwhile, the damage kept piling up behind the scenes. Teachers, burned out business owners gave up.